Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. Today's topic is recovering from ransomware. It's crucial to have the right priorities in place. This event is brought to you by Nasuni, Palo Alto Networks, Lacework, and Rubrik. My name is Keith Ward. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm really excited to be your moderator for this special event today. Now, before we get to today's presentation, though, we have a few housekeeping items that'll help you get the most out of this webinar. First off, we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel, which you can see right in the middle of your screen now. I want to note that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation to discuss some of your top questions that come in. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place just to say hello, which a lot of you have been doing. You are here from all over the place, Atlanta and Richmond, Virginia, and Massachusetts. And let's see, I see people from Dallas, California, South Carolina, Texas. So good to see everyone. Thanks for being here with us today. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know if we can help, if you've got any problems hearing or seeing anything. First thing you want to do if you've got issues is a browser refresh. Just hit that button, and that should solve any of those technical issues that you have. If that doesn't work, though, let us know in that Q&A, and we will hop right on it. All right, next to that Questions tab, you will find the Handouts tab. And there you will find a host of great and important resources, including downloads from each of our sponsors today. So I strongly encourage you to check those out right now and during the event. You'll also see there in that handout section a number of Actual Tech Media links, including one to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to our vast library of books on technology topics. And you'll also find a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. We got some really interesting ones coming up. Check that out and sign up if you are so inclined. Okay, at the end of this webinar today, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one of you attending right now. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire event to qualify for the prize. If you're interested in such things, the official terms and conditions of the prize drawing can be found in the handouts section. All right, now these expert series events are special product-neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by our expert today. But it is the support of our sponsors that make it possible for us to bring you this content. So we do want to give a special shout out to them today. And I'm going to give a few words for each of these sponsors here. We are supported by Nasuni. So Nasuni enables companies to access files from anywhere and protect files from anything through state-of-the-art file data services powered by the world's only cloud-native global file system. The solution is a cloud replacement for traditional network-attached storage and data protection technologies, consolidating file data in easily expandable cloud object storage at a fraction of the cost. That is Nasuni. All right, we are also sponsored by Palo Alto Networks, and you can see a QR code on there right now for a hands-on workshop. Now, Palo Alto innovates to outpace cyber threats so organizations can embrace technology with confidence. They provide next-generation cybersecurity to thousands of customers globally across all sectors. Their best-in-class cybersecurity platforms and services are backed by industry-leading threat intelligence and strengthened by state-of-the-art automation. Again, that QR code is up there for you to click and get more information. Our next sponsor for today is Lacework. Now, Lacework was founded on a core belief that better security starts with data. They built a revolutionary behavior-based machine learning engine, which is supported by more than 100 patents with data at its core. Lacework is designed to deliver on their vision for better, more secure clouds. And we are finally today, we are sponsored by Rubrik. By 2025, the cybercrime business will be worth $10 trillion. That's trillion with a T, making it the third largest economy in the world. To fight back, you need a way to secure your data, monitor for data risks, and quickly recover your data no matter where it lives. Rubrik helps you achieve business resilience against those cyber attacks, malicious insiders, and operational disruption. They secure your data wherever it lives across enterprise, cloud, and software as a service, making your business unstoppable. All right, I want to mention again that each of these sponsors that I've just discussed have a handout in the handout section. Download those resources now. Get more information on all of them. And with that, I am ready to introduce our speaker today. He is one of my favorite people, and he is Larry Seltzer. Larry is a security analyst, author, software developer, and CISSP. He has a long background in cybersecurity. He's a friend of mine. He knows so much about this industry. So I'm happy to welcome Larry here. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to hop on camera and joining Larry for some great Q&A. So keep those questions coming in. It looks like Larry is ready to go. So I am going to turn this over to him right now.
Well, thank you, Keith. Glad to be here. I'm Larry Seltzer, and I'm going to be talking about one of the scariest real-world threats to organizations these days, a ransomware attack. Of course, the best ransomware attack is the one you prevent through security technologies and procedures that I'm sure you've all implemented on your systems, but these can never be perfect because systems often become less usable as more security is applied to them. And that's just a real-world trade-off and not just in computing. And also because human beings are always involved and we're all imperfect. So you have to assume that an attack could get through and that it would cause potentially a great deal of harm to your computing systems and your company. When that happens, you have to be ready to recognize it and respond to it as quickly as possible. And to do that, you need a plan that you can follow. So let me give you if you learn nothing else, learn this point. If you're attacked and you don't have a plan, well, you're in deep trouble. That's the time, maybe not the only time, but that's the time when paying the ransom may well be your best option. And response time is not the time to decide what to do other than by adjusting to particular circumstances in the execution of the plan. In a significant ransomware attack, every minute is a minute of lost business, of customers getting angry, of employees with nothing to do but to be embarrassed and lose confidence. So by having a plan that you can launch immediately, you can send a message to all concerned that you're not helpless. You realize there's a problem, but you're actively working on resolving it. You've prepared for this unfortunate eventuality, and you'll get back to them with more information as soon as it becomes available. Many incident response plans include the defensive measures and monitoring that you should have in advance, maybe because they're written by companies that sell those products and services. And I'm a big fan of those products and services, but I'm not going to talk about that right now, at least not much, because my time is limited and because I have no products or services to sell you today. So here's the obligatory agenda slide. Before you plan, there's at least one thing you should do before you do any serious planning, and I'll talk about that. And then the meat of it, what you should plan for. I'll talk about the process of the planning in advance of creating an incident response plan to a ransomware attack and the different parts of the plan. The different parts of the plan are not necessarily sequential in execution. Some of the things, there are things you should always be doing, and some happen simultaneously during the execution of the plan wherever it's appropriate. And then you don't really know if your plan is going to work unless you test it. So we're going to talk about that. And it's really better to find problems in the plan during a test than in a real world crisis. Finally, I'll close with some unforeseen problems that turn up at times like these. And of course, I'm suggesting that you foresee them. So yeah, that's a bit of a contradiction, but I'm still going with it. Is your company a security company, one with deep security expertise? I'd be a bit surprised if a company like that signed up for this presentation, but if you aren't such a company, then you need one working for you when there's a ransomware attack. Um, this is a really important point because as good as your IT department might be, if they're not experts in security incident response, they will likely have a hard time responding. There are many of these companies, some of them very famous in the business, that can provide valuable advice in this regard, including in planning for incident response. So these companies have a focus on the security landscape that's much more detailed and current than anything you have. They may know, for example, that your attack looks like one they've seen a lot of recently. They may have experience with specific attacks that will allow them to speed up response to yours. You may be able to pay them to monitor your network in advance and find out about attacks before you do, maybe even prevent them, I'm not sure. So, of course, you pay more for better service, but you'll be able to report problems and get a quick response. You may even get a dedicated engineer to work with you. These companies help you to put up good defenses, but if you don't have these companies available on call in the event of an attack, then you really don't have much of a chance. There are other resources available, many for free, from government and private industry. It's always good to be as educated as possible on these subjects. And so the CISA, or Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency, is an actual US government body that acts as the operational lead for federal government IT security and a national coordinator for critical infrastructure security. And their site is really filled with quality information. They've got a cyber hygiene vulnerability scanning service, which I haven't used, but it's basically an automated remote service that scans your networks from outside and sends you a report. And there's a lot of these out there. And your consultant should be arranging such testing, maybe through one of these services, maybe through their own. But the CISA docs can give you some idea of what's going to be done and maybe some basis, some questions to use if you're interviewing the companies. More interesting as a government entity is the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or MSISEC. It's a community-centered nonprofit funded by the CISA. They have, for example, hardened system images for Linux distribution, Windows, Mac, and for all the big public clouds. If your company's building your own system images, you could do a whole lot worse than to start using these as your basis. You definitely won't be the low-hanging security fruit in the cloud. And the MSISEC also receives incident reports, like the ones we're talking about here, from all over, and shares them with parties like your security consultant so that they can respond quickly. So let's see here. Next, the pre-attack. Your experts will help you to gather the various components of an incident response so that they're ready when you need them. So you need to identify all members of the response team, their responsibilities, their functions, appoint a designated leader responsible for coordinating activities. You probably should have designated backups for everyone and try not to let them both be unavailable at the same time. For many reasons, it's good to have at least one person present to document events as they happen, like a scribe. A lot of what happens will be recorded simply because it's done in email and instant messaging, but it's good to have somebody with trying to keep things in a log. Compile a complete list and inventory of physical and cloud assets, hardware and software, along with diagrams of how they interconnect, pointing out APIs, WANs, that sort of thing. Of course, you have one of those because it's best practice, but having that makes diagnosis of problems much easier to do. And another thing, new. It's buzzword alert. It's the software supply chain, and having a software supply chain inventory would also be extremely helpful for somebody trying to diagnose an incident like a ransomware incident. It's a relatively new thing, and I don't want to get too far out of scope, but um, it's um, it's a way that you can keep track not only of the software you're running in the system, but the components that were used to build that software. Very often attackers will target some common library that might be in many of your packages, and supply chain um, inventory will help you to know where all of those are. You need an emergency contact list. You need to include all employees, service providers, suppliers, even customers who will be impacted by the ransomware incident. Exactly what you tell them when there's an incident is more complicated, and you'll have to make some of those decisions on the fly. And this is really one of those preventative measures, but it's central. So I'll say it again. Recovery is a whole lot harder if you don't have backups. So securing and testing your backups is critical to incident response. So many ways that a ransomware attack might manifest. IT or security might notice something wrong and investigate it. Employees or customers might be locked out of their systems or data, or someone might get an explicit message along the lines of the one on the screen right now. This is an old one, I think 2017, but eventually a message, something like this, will come up to the company one way or another, telling you that you've been attacked and that you should pony up some cryptocurrency by a certain time, date, or it will all get worse. Later on, I'll have a slide on education training. It's an important part of what happens at this point. You want users to report problems promptly so that they might be an early sign of attack. They might be reporting through normal channels like support at your company, but email might be down. So you need to have alternate support channels like phone numbers or Slack, that kind of thing. Tell users you want them to report problems. So far, this is all stuff you should be doing anyway. The people fielding the support requests need to have some idea of how to see that a sudden increase in certain types of user problems doesn't mean that you just tell them all to delete their cookies. If there's a pattern, it could be serious and it needs to be escalated quickly. So at the detection stage, the bottom line is, in a sense, the normal state of the company. Be on the lookout for signs of attack. There are also specific symptoms of penetration attempts that may call for immediate escalation, even if you only see one of them, like files with unusual file extensions in privileged file directories. These aren't likely to be identified by users, but by administrators or perhaps through alerts and other monitoring software you have. And not all admins are security experts, so they need to know when they see something that's serious enough to escalate. And escalation. So now you know you have a problem. You may or may not know that it's ransomware at this point, and in a sense that doesn't matter. What matters is that it's time to put the extraordinary parts of the plan into execution. There should be a group of people who are authorized to put the plan into action. Somebody should always be around ready to do it. This shouldn't be considered a crisis thing you avoid unless absolutely necessary. At the same time, the decision should be made only by relatively senior people who understand the tech well enough and business implications well enough to understand, the potential. The most important thing at this point is, well, there's a few of them. You want to alert at least a group, some of the senior management, your out-of-house security experts, probably everyone on staff with any responsibility for security or IT. You might want to use channels outside of corporate IT, like text messages, in addition to channels on which less dire alerts come, like Slack again. Tell members of the response team to drop everything and focus on the execution of the plan and inform your outside consultant. And then you begin the determination of which systems are affected. You isolate affected systems, you determine what happened. And I'll go into those a little bit below, but first, communications is really important at a time like this. It can really make or break your company. Internally, as soon as you can, inform all affected employees, which is not necessarily the same thing as the response team. And that may be all employees. Tell them that there's an incident, but you have a plan in place for these situations, and here are some of the steps we're taking. This is actually a message you can mostly write in advance as part of your plan and fill in specifics, in the moment. Depending on the extent of the attack, you may want to report to local, state, national authorities, or some combination of them. So you need that contact information in the plan. There may actually be a legal requirement for you to do so. And this is another aspect of the plan where you need to have clear in advance. You need to have it all clear in advance so that your legal people are an important part of the planning too. Your consultants may have some expertise on this and some advice, but they're not your lawyers, so you can't rely on them for it. Externally, notify customers and business partners of the incident and release appropriate information regarding the extent of the damage. Remember, it's common for criminals to threaten to release confidential information to ratchet up pressure on the victims to pay quickly. Now, finally, transparency. It's natural for companies to want to hide damaging information, but news of these attacks inevitably gets out. Transparency really does minimize the damage to your reputation. It also helps investigators and provides affected parties with an opportunity to take steps to protect their own sensitive data. Being proactive and transparent means that your message will be the one that's reported, at least initially. Honestly, the worst thing you can possibly do is to say nothing, have people find out from news reports. Actually, check that. The worst thing you can do is lie and then have your employees and customers and business partners found out that you just lied. Just don't do it. And if you don't know something, just say, I don't know. The truth really counts for a lot in these cases. Once you know there's a ransomware infection, it becomes critical to prevent it from spreading. Assuming you didn't find out about it too late, but it may be tempting to pull the plug on everything, but that's probably going too far. You need to shut down specific systems or subnets if you know that they're involved, but you need to try to keep infrastructure in place to work on the problem. Once you've brought your outside experts into the picture, this plan, it becomes mostly following their advice. There may be a time before they can tell you anything, and in the meantime, you need to be able to do something to address the problem on your own. And exactly what you can do that's appropriate for the network at this point will be part of any decent plan, and will depend on the particulars of your symptoms and the symptoms, of your systems and the symptoms you're observing. Being more in touch with the threats that others are experiencing, the consultants might have a good idea right off what the attack is and what's the best way to proceed. Or they might need more time to examine your systems. It may be obvious which systems are affected because you can't reach them or the data on them is unreadable. Disconnect these systems from the network immediately. If you can't tell which systems are affected, it probably makes sense to disconnect everything from the internet temporarily so that you can disconnect any outside actors. If you're having trouble doing this through your network management, pull network cables. If you can't do this quickly, power systems down, although there's a problem with that. It will remove evidence in volatile memory. So you're going to want to find a few things as quickly as possible. The point of entry, or what they call patient zero, obvious symptoms like files with suspicious extensions, alerts coming from your own systems. Remember, at this point, you need to maintain communications with your team and with other communications I talked about before, and it may be necessary to do all this on cellular, This may be a problem for remote analysis of your system by outside consultants. They may need some sort of special access to it, and they may provide for that. That may be part of their service. They'll have some sort of plan for how to work at this point. At the same time, you identify affected systems, you need to triage. You need to know which systems are critical to the organization and require first attention. Another thing I would do immediately is to check on your backup systems and confirm if your latest backups are affected. If they aren't, it may be worth disconnecting them, at least from the internet, at least for the time being. And once again, I don't want to drift into preventative measures too much, but backups, at least any kind of destructive rights on backups, which is what ransomware attackers want to use, they should have special protections like special second factors that only a few trusted people have. In any case, the state of your backups is key to determining the prospects and the time frame for recovery. You need to preserve and examine relevant log files, assuming they're still there. That's another thing that ransomware attackers will go after. They will want to wipe them as soon as possible, but there are ways to prevent that. And if they're there, you should take separate measures to copy them to a safe place. And as you gather more information, you can begin to determine what happened, which will inform the containment and recovery strategies, which come next. What happened in the sense of which systems are affected is one thing, but someone needs to determine what happened in the sense of the impact on business. That's another thing that someone needs to be ready to report on for effective communications and prioritization. And so all this should eventually lead you to find the specific infection, some kind of malware, and you can begin to combat it. I've already mentioned some containment strategies like disconnecting and powering down systems because many things have to happen at once in response to a ransomware incident. But there's more. Some of the measures you may need to take can interfere with others. Like, for instance, it would be a really good idea to capture system images of the file systems and of the volatile memory on all the affected systems. But this is going to be a lot harder to do if you've disconnected them, and even harder if you had to shut them down in a hurry. But if you can get these images, they help a lot during forensic investigations and to determine what happened and how your systems were compromised. If you can't preserve volatile information stored in the system memory, the problem, it's going to be a lot harder to diagnose. In addition to containing the threat, your consultants, they may have developed decryption tools or identified encryption flaws in the attacker's encryption that you can use to decrypt your data. If they have experience with this malware or variants of it, they may also provide additional information regarding steps to identify other impacted systems and how to turn off the ransomware binaries. Another thing, and once again, this is kind of a preventative thing, but it really makes a difference here, and that's just a zero trust approach, which I'm sure you've heard of elsewhere. It's where access is granted to resources based, only to those who can show authorization and prove identity and to do it a lot. And that makes containment a lot easier. It makes the attacker's job in spreading much harder. Eradication is where good systems management practices really show their value. And why? It's because once you know you have your data decrypted or restored, like your backups are okay, it may be easiest, and it certainly may be more straightforward, to wipe all the affected systems and rebuild them from system images and templates rather than to try and clean them, which is always an iffy proposition. This requires that your data is isolated and protected, but like I said, that's really, really important. So if your backups are safe and you're prepared properly, the worst case is that you wipe and start things from scratch. Now this can take time, but it can be done in such a way that you can bring systems online, as it's going on, and as others are being rebuilt. Another advantage of this approach is that you can test it to the point that you can have meaningful time estimates ready for recovery from a worst case scenario. This is a situation where having a prioritized list of systems in the plan can really help you to recover more quickly. It definitely may be possible that a removal technique is available that will allow you to recover more quickly, but I would want to do a behind the scenes rebuild after that anyway, if at a lower priority. And there's a case you should be doing that every now and then for other reasons. But you just can't just take either approach or any good approach without first determining the root cause of the breach, the patient zero, and ensuring that it can't just happen again immediately. So recovery is also a good time to perform some security hygiene. Consider resetting all passwords, especially ratcheting up protection of privileged accounts. In an event like a ransomware response, it would be surprising if something unforeseen didn't happen. And I think of unforeseen events as those that weren't supposed to happen based on testing and things that nobody anticipated or they're impossible to anticipate. For instance, the attackers might have access to one or more severe zero-day attacks, which are unknown, and there's no patches for them, and there may be no good mitigation possible, at least at first. Some crazy or unexplained event like a power failure or a fire at a facility where your backups are stored could slow your recovery to the point that the business cost is severe. Or maybe your real-life execution just doesn't match up to what you expected from testing. Maybe some key people are unavailable, maybe the restore process isn't working. That could happen for lots of reasons. Incidentally, ransomware recovery is a great reason not to use slow media like tape, certainly, for backups of data that you might need in a hurry. And of course, you would need a pretty good, some fast, a lot of bandwidth to do it quickly enough. So here's another thing. Maybe your attack is secondary to an attack on a vendor of yours. I think I've mentioned the 2020 SolarWinds attack in just about every paper and presentation I've written since then, and because it's always a great example of something. Their customers relied on them for protection, and instead they became a vector for attacking their customers. Many vendors have security failures all the time. A few months ago, Microsoft lost a code signing key. So how do you plan for these situations? And the number of possibilities, I think, is probably infinity. So trying to plan for them is not a good use of your resources. At a time like that, your only hope is that your experts are smart and nimble and can react to the situation well. And everyone's always at the mercy of experts for something. Eventually, you'll sit down and discuss how all of what happened should affect the plan in the future. And the person recording will be especially busy at this time during the incident. But in the meantime, what do? The MS-ISAC says, paying ransom will not ensure your data is decrypted or that your systems or data will no longer be compromised. And basically they and the federal law enforcement don't recommend paying ransom. And what they say is totally true. It may not work, but it may be that they have to recommend against ransom, at least publicly, whether it makes sense or not. But plenty of large companies have paid ransoms, and for good reasons. If not paying the ransom could seriously endanger your business, you may, as a business matter, have no choice. I mean, I've seen politicians propose laws against paying ransoms, and that alone is good reason to believe it might be a good thing. There have been businesses, I know medical practices, for example, that were unable to recover from attacks and just failed. Maybe they weren't able to pay the ransom, maybe the owners objected on principle, but was it the right thing to let the business fail and not even try to recover? I'm not going to tell anybody that that's the right thing to do. Even if you do everything right and throw a lot of resources into the kind of planning we're talking about here, there's no guarantee it will work. Remember all the wild card stuff I talked about, like third-party attacks. Something really bad could happen. It's just prudent to plan for it. So you have to have a plan for paying the ransom. Mostly this means having access in event of an emergency to a big hunk of cash, knowing how to buy the cryptocurrency the attacker demands, how to pay it, how much cash. Well, that depends on a lot of things, but in 2021, when the Colonial Pipeline was attacked, they paid 75 bitcoins, $4.4 million at the time. If you're in touch with law enforcement at this point, and you should be, they will probably want to know all the details, even though it may be impossible to trace the payments or to use them to find out who the attacker was. In the Colonial Pipeline attack, interestingly, the FBI was somehow able to recover about 64 of the 75 bitcoins in the ransom. I've never heard anyone explain how they were able to do that. But you shouldn't assume that they're going to be able to recover the ransom. How to do all this is something you should work out in advance with your consultant. The larger consulting groups with experience in this sort of thing know how to do it. And they also know how to negotiate with the attackers, which is something I've heard. I don't know this, but it makes sense. I've heard it's possible. I can imagine saying, look, we have a plan in place. In the short term, we can only get this much money, and we just can't do anymore, and it might work. So closing up, sort of, even if good planning is no guarantee of successful ransomware incident response, it definitely helps. And like education generally, planning for incident response should be a process that never ends. There are many ways you can improve your plans. It's good for both the employees and the organization that there be a post-mortem of some kind where you discuss how well the plan performed in response to the event. Probably some of this will be obvious to everyone by then, but there should be a process that accepts input from everyone, maybe even customers. It can be online to a degree, and that's kind of the way things are now. But I'm a big believer in the value of having people talking face to face for really important communications and something clarifying about it. So you should try to have that. Zoom just isn't as good. The response team can be present. The response teams can present to everyone what happened, why it happened, and how it might be prevented in the future. Incident response plans are like backups. You don't know if they're going to work if you don't test them. Better to find a problem in a test than a real crisis. Most of these, the way they're done is called tabletop exercises. It's another thing you'll probably need to rely on your consultants for. Although the relevant IT people will all be involved, and they'll become familiar with it. These exercises are not tests of the procedures. They're simulation games where everybody's sitting around and discussing what comes next. You can find free templates for these, by the way, including one from the CISA. These exercises are important for ensuring everybody knows their role in an emergency. There's a facilitator who will raise anticipated events and throw wildcards at the team. It's going to seem obvious to some people, but we run fire drills, even though everyone already knows how to walk out of the building. There's a right way to do it, and in a crisis, people know how to do it. You need to know how to do it right. And like I said, it's not the same as testing, but the actual, you need to test the actual procedures too. Like, if you don't know if your backups work, so you should definitely try to test restores, including like major fast restores if you can. And you should take note of the time that these things take, and put them into the plan, because they'll help you to make recovery time estimates when the time comes. And it may be a good idea to write out step-by-step instructions for some of them, like for disconnecting a subnet, and include them in the plan if for some reason the available person is unfamiliar. Training and tabletop exercises are related, but they're not the same thing. The test is not the time to learn the procedures, and just giving them a document isn't to read isn't enough. You have to train members in their roles and responsibilities to ensure that each person is familiar and comfortable with their role. And once again, this is something your consultant can do or can refer you to people who can help. And this is important stuff. You really shouldn't expect people. You should expect people to take it seriously and learn it. I mean, IT isn't often crisis work, but if push comes to shove, if you need the person to do their job and they're not there, it could be serious consequences. So that's all I've got for now, and maybe it's even more than I had time for. So first, thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm glad to answer them as best I can.
All right. Thank you so much, Larry, for that overview of how to recover from ransomware and how to prevent it, and all those critical things that companies need to know. You're right. We've had a number of questions come in, and it's time to go over some of them. So if you're ready, let's kind of dive right in.
Go for it.
You talked a lot about having a security partner, some outside experts. So how big do you think a company has to be to do that? I mean, if you're an SMB, right, a small medium business, is this something you should be doing? Is this something you can even afford to do? So give us a sense of if there is a size that you must be.
Even a one-man shop like me needs to think about what they would do in a case like this, although I'm not worth targeting. But the gangs that do these attacks are certainly looking for larger targets that have deeper pockets. But even a small business needs to have some access to expertise in event of a security incident. And actually, I don't know if it's typical, but if you have some ability to call them on an emergency basis, you need that. So it's certainly too much to ask the average small business to put in the kind of resources I've just been talking about. But it's some businesses owners just know, or they should know, that there comes a time where it's complicated enough, and it's complicated enough that the company's IT department isn't capable enough that it'd be really bad for them if there were a major incident were to happen, and there's enough on the line that they need to really have something in place. And so talk to your consultants. Yeah.
And as you and I have talked about before, in relation to spending money on security, you have to weigh the cost of whatever you're doing. If that's a security partner, an outside company, you have to weigh that against the potential loss to your company. Even if you're a small company, you could have, in some ways, the pockets aren't as deep. They can afford even less to have a debilitating event happen. So you have to think about that, not just the upfront cost, but what is it going to cost if an attack is successful? Undoubtedly. Okay. Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago about testing backups. So is there a particular rule of thumb on how often you should test those backups? I'm not sure what the current conventional wisdom on that is, or if there is conventional wisdom.
I'm not sure either. I mean, you need some resources to do it. You can't just overwrite your running systems. You need to have systems to back up, to restore to, in order to do the test. So it's this is another thing, by the way, that I guess smaller businesses would be less likely to be adept at, but everybody should probably be backing up data to some cloud service. So you can that it's going to be more secure there than it's going to be sitting on some device on your network. But for a bigger company that can throw some money at it, it should be part of at least your monthly procedures. Maybe once a year you try to do something really big scale, and it's
And maybe
You sh-
also, Larry, that the type of information, financial information, for instance, or stuff that requires a really, low RTO, RPO. Those are the kind of things maybe those backups should be checked more often. So I would imagine it is sort of situational in that way too. Is that fair to say?
yeah. This is a there's business. It's a business decision to an extent. That might also affect the speed of the the speed of the backup media that you choose. Your higher priority stuff is going to be the stuff that you can recover most quickly.
Right.
Um, and
Just
yeah,
not on tapes for ransomware if you need to get back up quickly, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. So someone comes to you, we're going to do a little hypothetical here, and they say, Larry, I can afford to pay you to give me one piece of advice to protect me or to help me recover or whatever it is as it relates to ransomware. Only one piece of advice, one most important thing to do. What do you tell me?
Well, it's it really is to pick the right expert who's somebody uh, with experience in incident response who can be there to help you when there is an incident and who can help you to plan for it. Um, and there, like I said, there's lots of companies that specialize in this, and many of them are well known. There are also some of the big companies like Microsoft, Google, and all that. They've got some materials you can work with, or that you and your consultant can work with. You've got to do something. Um, but actually, now that I think about it, let me give you a second one thing you should do.
You're giving me bonus, more value for my money, right? Way to go. Go ahead.
And I think I mentioned this, which is that backups. You really you need to regularly back up your important data, and you need to store those backups in a place where they are not accessible to just anybody on your network. They need to be protected by, if you're using an offline backup service, don't have it don't have it connect to your Active Directory and just use the admin uh, privileges, or you should it really should be some sort of separate privilege system so that an attacker who managed to get even very high levels of privileges, they just can't get at the backups. Because if you have your backups, then you can recover.
Right. And we know because of that, also, Larry, that the ransomware actors very frequently target those backups very high priority because of what you said. If the backups are corrupted, if they're no good, then recovery is useless at that point. You're much more likely to get the ransom paid.
There have been cases, by the way, where I've talked about the speed of restore a lot. There have been cases where companies have paid the ransom because when in the moment they realized the restore process was so slow that it was going to be a lot faster and cheaper just to pay the ransom and decrypt.
Hmm.
So that's another thing to figure out.
Yeah, that's a tough place to be. You
Mhm.
spend the money to get the backups, but then you have to spend the money on the ransom anyway because you can't get the restore process done fast enough to prevent some sort of disaster, for your organization. Larry, this has been such a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you so much for your insights in the Q&A. Thank you for all the information that will help make backups and make organizations' data centers and the data that is in there more secure from the bad guys. And I appreciate your time and for bringing all this to us.
Okay, well, thank you for having me.
Wow, what a great presentation by Larry. I think you'll all agree. And what outstanding questions from all of you today. You folks were on point, as they say, with those questions. Great stuff. I hope you enjoyed that discussion. I sure did. And before we wrap up, though, we have one more piece of business today, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing for $250. As I mentioned at the beginning, you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible for that prize. And we have a winner for today, and that winner is Ryan Clark from Pennsylvania. Congratulations to you, Ryan. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, everyone, we are wrapped for today. On behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. Those sponsors, again, Nasuni, Palo Alto Networks, Lacework, and Rubrik. Great, innovative companies, every single one of them. I want to thank all of you for being with us today, all you attendees for your interest in this topic and for spending a bit of time with us today. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and I will see you hopefully in an upcoming event soon. Have a great rest of your day.